Hi all, welcome to week 13. This week we're going to talk about the natives of the Northeast. I've kind of assigned a lot of reading. That article is fairly long, although I think that it's really well done in terms of kind of looking at gender in a more anthropologically sound approach. So this video will probably be half an hour, maybe a little bit more or less than that. So I just realized that it's not going to be the full kind of hour-long uh, video production that I was doing kind of at the first half of the semester. All right, so the geography and environment of the Northeast. The Northeast really spans this, if you're looking at this map here, that army green color region, but it only goes down to kind of the Carolinas. So it doesn't really encompass all of that Alabama, Mississippi region. So we're really talking about the Great Lakes area, Maine, all the way on the East Coast, the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi River Valley, and the St. Lawrence River. If you guys have ever been in this area, it's pretty cold in the winter, hot and humid in the summer. It is forested, deciduous forest is what it is mostly, with maple, birch, oak, hickory, elm, and willow. The coastal region obviously provides sea life and beaches, and obviously a different set of foodstuffs. I talked about the rivers already. The Great Lakes region is also important. And the Appalachian Mountains. So in this area, there is a lot of water. Water is not an issue for these people because there are rivers and the ocean and lakes pretty much all over the place. In terms of the history and ethnographic research, there is a little bit of some debate on this first one. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania is dated at about 19,000 before present. If you're looking at that date, that puts it way before the Clovis point. Again, archaeologists are debating this. However, they keep digging deeper in the Meadowcroft rock shelter. So some people are even saying that it's further back, 2025. So again, we're starting to push those dates back a little bit with this one. Debert in Nova Scotia also was settled in this area 10,000 years before present, and they had kind of just more. They didn't have the exact same building style that we see. We see like deer skin hung over kind of more hut-like shelters. The Coster site in Illinois, 9,500 before present, and it pretty much shows us a lot of settlement patterns and different kind of developments in this area. At 6,000 years ago, cemeteries emerge. So with cemeteries, we can pretty much look at sedentary life, and we also get ranked political systems. Remember, so a lot of things should be kind of becoming more clear to you in terms of what equals what, and a lot of times subsistence and movement has a lot to do with how egalitarian a group is, right? At the band level system, they're moving. You don't have permanent structure. You don't have wealth accumulation. All of those things don't exist, so you have egalitarianism. Once you get into permanent structures and villages, just like we saw on the Northwest coast, we start to get into chiefs, chiefdoms, even a little bit of private ownership, and we'll talk about kind of farms and that structure. At least, again, I don't think that the natives have the same version of private that we do in terms of like selling off land, but they definitely had kind of this traditional view of my family's been farming this land forever, and this is what gives me kind of the reasoning and the rights and privileges to farm it as well. So again, cemeteries are a key indicator. So if we find cemeteries, we realize that these people were no longer nomadic and were permanently kind of stationed there. And then we start to get into grave goods, and a lot of times we see hierarchy where you could find a grave of a chief who's going to be buried with more symbolic kind of grave goods that had higher symbolic value or more wealth accumulation. 5,000 to 3,000 before years before present, we have evidence of agriculture, and this is not your corn or bean agriculture. That's going to come up from Mexico. But we do have sunflower or sumpweed and some gourds that are being, tended to, basically. Now, remember, again, in the Northeast, we have good soils, we have a lot of water, and then we have a good growing season, to be honest. With that hot humidity, we get pretty fast growing. And things like gourds can stick around, seeds, sunflower seeds, we can store all those things. And again, in terms of nutrition, we have a lot of protein out of nuts, proteins and fats, and carbs, actually. So it's kind of almost like complete food if you have enough of it. 5,000 years ago to 50 or 4,500, we get old copper culture, which is cold hammer copper artifacts, and a lot of this is coming out of the Great Lakes region. Their early American history, we started mining copper in this area, and I don't know if there's a ton of this natural copper left. I'm sure that they're still mining it, but the natives would cold hammer. They didn't do metallurgy. Remember, they're not smelting metal, so copper was cold hammered. The Woodland period. The Woodland period is the fascinating time period that spans basically 3,000 years before present to contact. Now, the first section is what they call the Adena complex, and we start to get burial mounds. This is kind of the first sign that we're going to get more permanent settlements and structured political systems. Hopewell complex, you probably heard of Hopewell. We start to get Cahokia, big cities, large chiefdoms, division of labor, and really this would act more like a town structure or almost even a mini kingdom in a way. Cahokia is said to have 25,000 to 50,000 people kind of in that area. At least that's kind of the last, those are the last numbers that I've read. So the Hopewell kind of build on that. They get into ranked societies and burial mounds. By about closer to contact, we had 1,000 years or so to contact. We started to see this dissipate. This centralized structure of political systems dissipates, and we start to move into permanent towns. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about the Hopewell complex or the Mississippian cultures, in terms of that political structure, declining because of either war, famine. Remember, civilizations and keeping everybody happy is really, really difficult. And we can see that even in our own. There are plenty of people in America that are not happy with America, right? So again, these groups, I'll be very honest, they had the opportunity to pretty much leave if things were not going well. This is similar to the Mayans. Remember, they had enough knowledge of agriculture, hunting, gathering, food, that they could just basically drop out of civilization and no longer participate if they wanted to. And now that could have been caused by famine, no longer trusting kind of your hierarchy, your political organizations, and just really it gives that opportunity. It becomes much more difficult in a civilization like our own, where we become so dependent that each of us don't have the knowledge to basically survive in this way. So the Mississippian cultures basically drop out and form these kind of permanent town settlements. And again, they're marked by ranked societies and also warfare. So warfare becomes very constant among these individuals after dropping out of this large-scale societal structure of the Hopewell complex. And it tends to be very antagonistic in this way. And again, what do we have that are indicators of war? We have ownership, we have agriculture, we have permanent settlements. So those three things are in place, and then there's a bunch of warfare, and we'll get into kind of how that works itself out, at least among the Iroquois. Contact. Jamestown, remember, 1607 in this area. The Powhatan they also have a confederacy. That Pocahontas story is going to be part of that part of this contact period. Plymouth in 1620. Then we have New Amsterdam in the 1650s be a permanent settlement. This is basically at the site of New York City. The British later take that over. And really, this is, to be honest, when we get into the Northeast, we're really getting into United States kind of history that is covered in grade school or high school. These are the wars that the natives end up going through, right? And there are a tremendous amount of wars, and I don't want to describe them all. Ultimately, you have the French and the British, and they're kind of competing. The natives like the French the most because they tended to just want to trade with them. They didn't want to take their land. The British come in. The British want more land, but they like the British more than the American colonists. So they're pitting each other against each other. They're forming basically allies with these different groups or alliances with these different groups, and constant war is happening when we get right after we get contact. To be honest, again, I think I've discussed Jamestown and why it was kind of had that antagonism going on. Remember, at first they were kind of trading and getting along, and then the chief realizes that they're not going to leave. And they start to build permanent structures, and he gets upset, right? He thought it was temporary. They were going to kind of get along in their own way, but definitely didn't want them on their land. And this is going to lead to a lot of issues. In terms of ethnography, this is very important. Thomas Jefferson does a little bit of research in of the Native Americans in his time period. And remember, he's in Virginia, so and also does a decent amount of research into these areas when he's one of the founding fathers looking at how to form a government. Remember, our first form of government that lasted about 10 years was kind of a failure, was the Articles of Confederation. And those articles, ultimately, this is some murky history, but a lot of people say that the Iroquois Confederation, they had kind of a constitution, and a lot of what was taken or was used in our Articles of Confederation were similar to the Iroquois. Now, again, people are debunking that and saying that it's not necessarily true, but this is one of the reasons why your book adds in Thomas Jefferson. Lewis Henry Morgan. Remember, Lewis Henry Morgan wrote Ancient Society. So Ancient Society was his theoretical basis for evolution. But Lewis Henry Morgan writes the first ethnography for anthropology. Okay, and this is called the League of the Haudenosaunee. Okay, this is Haudenosaunee is another, or the native word for Iroquois. Okay. In terms of economics, fascinating stuff. Remember, when the natives get into agriculture, so they've had probably gourds and sunflowers for maybe 5,000 years. Corn's going to come in at about 1,000, a little bit maybe before that years ago, and beans as well from Mexico, and this kind of more proper squash. What this picture is here is a picture of the three sisters, and the three sisters are that you grow corn, squash, and beans all together. So ultimately, the beans climb up the corn, and the squash is down below. This seemed to kind of work out in terms of growing structure, and these plants didn't compete. They were symbiotic in relationship in a lot of ways. So, and a lot of in terms of the agriculture, I'll just kind of switch, kind of go down the list here. Slash and burn is what they would use. So they would kind of do the clearings, all the old brush they would burn out. This would bring nutrients and nitrogens back into the soil. However, they would also after several crops were planted, they would let the native vegetation come back, and they would leave that field area for about 10 years, and then they would replant it. So lying fallow, the land process, the natives had this figured out, but they also had a lot of land. They were not competing for fertile land. In terms of protein sources or animal products, deer, elk, bear, rabbit, squirrels, beaver, sea mammals if you lived on the coast, fish, shellfish, crawfish, snakes, and turtles, turkeys, waterfowl, and other birds, and eggs were definitely important. Men did most of the hunting with a bow and arrow. Pit traps and snares were also used. Berries, acorns, hickory nuts, plums, cherries, maple sap was used for a sweetener, and wild rice in the Great Lakes region was also used. Tobacco, very important. It's Native American. The wampum were shell beads used as currency. The Haudenosaunee would use them and put them together into a belt, and this would record events. And I'll talk about the Wampum